A quiet house sits on a hill above the Pacific, the kind of place that looks peaceful from the road, even when the ocean wind moves through the trees. Morning light filters through the curtains in thin golden strips, landing on floors and furniture that have seen ordinary family days. Inside, a housekeeper moves from room to room with the steady rhythm of routine until she stops. What she finds that July morning in 2017 will race around the world before the sun is fully up. The voice that once made stadiums shake is gone. 41 years old. No letter left behind. Only a sudden, absolute silence where a scream used to live. Most people think they already know the story. They remember the songs that felt like they were written about their own private battles. The stage is packed with people screaming the words back at the top of their lungs, and the shock of the ending that arrived without warning. But the real story does not begin under those lights. It begins years earlier, in a different kind of heat, in a place far from any stage, where a boy first learned that pain could lock you inside yourself, and, somehow, also keep you moving forward. What turned that boy into the voice of a generation, and what finally took him from it, still carries weight that no number of records sold or awards won can fully measure. Chester Bennington never set out to become a symbol of anything. He only needed a place to put the noise that lived inside him, the constant pressure that never seemed to quiet. Over more than 20 years, that noise became anthems for millions who felt broken, angry, or invisible. His life was a long act of survival that often looked like pure victory from the outside, and a private war that kept burning even when the world was cheering the loudest. This is not a list of albums or awards. It is the path of a man who took the wounds no one wanted to talk about and turned them into songs that made complete strangers feel less alone, and who kept fighting long after most people believed the hardest part of his story was already over. Picture a stage under white lights, so bright they erase the faces in the front rows and turn the air into something electric. A thin figure moves like something barely contained by skin and bone. Sweat flies from his hair with every sharp movement. The crowd already knows every line by heart. When he opens his mouth, the sound is not careful or polished. It is raw, sudden, almost desperate, as if the words have been waiting too long and now have to fight their way out into the open. That voice belonged to Chester Bennington. For millions of listeners, it felt like someone had finally named the exact weight they carried in silence every day. Songs about crawling under your own skin, about going completely numb, about the desperate need to break free from something you cannot even see. These were not abstract ideas to him. They were pages torn from the middle of his own life and set to music that millions could feel in their chests. Audiences saw a rock star who seemed fearless. They heard power and release and the kind of honesty that made arenas feel intimate. What they could not see was how hard that power was to hold once the lights went down and the buses pulled away. Behind every performance lived a man who had spent years learning how to survive feelings most people never speak about out loud. The same intensity that made the songs unforgettable also made ordinary mornings feel heavy, like walking through deep water with no shore in sight. Yet long before any stage existed, that same intensity was already forming in a quieter, more dangerous place. One with no applause, no crowd, and no easy way out. In Phoenix, Arizona, a house looked ordinary from the street. A police detective who spent his working days investigating cases of child abuse. A nurse. For children. Chester was the youngest. From the outside, it looked like a normal working family trying to build a life in the desert heat. Inside, the marriage was already cracking under pressure that the children could feel even if they did not fully understand it. When Chester was 11, the divorce became final and the family split apart. He stayed mostly with his father after that. Years before the divorce papers were signed, something far darker had already begun. From the age of 7 until he was about 13, an older male friend, someone the family trusted and allowed close, sexually abused him. Chester told almost no one for a long time. Later, as an adult, he would explain that fear of being judged and a complicated kind of pity for the person who hurt him kept the secret locked inside. A child does not yet have the language for that kind of violation. He simply carries it, day after day, while the rest of the world keeps moving as if nothing has changed. School added another layer of damage that settled deep. He was thin, different, an easy target who stood out for reasons he could not control. Bullies found him quickly and made the days harder. By the age of 11, he had already started using drugs. First marijuana, then harder things that promised a temporary escape. As a teenager, he described days of taking multiple hits of acid, smoking crack, using meth, then turning to opium just to come down from the high. He weighed around 110 pounds at times. His mother once said he looked like he had stepped out of a concentration camp. The drugs did not erase the pain. They only gave it somewhere else to live for a few hours before it returned, often stronger. Music became the only place where the chaos inside him seemed to make any sense at all. The noise that never stopped found a shape when he sang. He joined local bands and poured everything into them. One of them, Gray Days, played the Phoenix circuit night after night and released records that never traveled far beyond the desert. By his early 20s, Chester was married, working a regular job to pay the bills, and quietly deciding that the dream of making music for a living was probably finished. The noise was still there, pressing against the inside of his skull, but the path forward looked closed. Then a single phone call arrived on his 23rd birthday, and the direction of everything changed in a matter of days. The call came from a music executive who had worked with Gray Days years earlier. A band in Los Angeles needed a singer. They already had the songs and a clear plan for what they wanted to become. They just needed the right voice to carry it. Instrumental tracks arrived. Chester listened once and felt something click into place with a certainty he had not felt in a long time. He recorded vocals over them and flew to California. Within days, he was standing in a room with Mike Shinoda, Brad Delson, and the rest of the group, then called Zero. They renamed themselves Hybrid Theory. What struck Chester most in those first meetings was their seriousness. After years of local bands that never seemed to move forward no matter how hard they worked, a group with an actual plan and the discipline to follow it felt like oxygen after a long time underwater. They worked long hours. They argued over details. They refined every part of the sound until it felt exact. In October 2000, the album Hybrid Theory reached the world. It did not simply sell well. It exploded across radio stations, bedrooms, and car stereos. Songs such as One Step Closer, Crawling, and In the End became the soundtrack for a generation that felt angry, numb, and unseen all at once. Chester's ability to move from a near whisper to a full-throated scream in a single breath turned private pain into something people could share without having to explain themselves. Suddenly, the boy who had been abused, bullied, and high was standing in front of tens of thousands of people singing his own words back to him at the top of their lungs. For a time, it felt like the rescue he had been waiting for his entire life. But success does not rewrite a nervous system shaped by early trauma. The same patterns that began in Phoenix followed him onto tour buses and into hotel rooms after the shows ended. Alcohol, drugs, periods when the people closest to him said there were clearly two versions of Chester, the man they knew and loved, and another version that took over and left wreckage behind that everyone else had to clean up. In 2006, after his first marriage ended and the drinking had become life-threatening, he faced a choice he later described in the simplest possible terms: stop or die. He entered treatment. He got sober for stretches of time that felt hard-won. He began speaking openly in interviews about addiction and depression because he believed silence was more dangerous than honesty, and because he hoped his words might reach someone who was still hiding. He married again. He became a father to children he clearly adored and tried to protect from the darker parts of his own story. He continued writing songs that still carried the old weight, even while new life surrounded him with light. He formed a side project called Dead by Sunrise, so the heavier personal material would have somewhere honest to live. He kept performing, night after night, giving everything to crowds who needed the release as much as he did, sometimes more. A deep friendship grew with Chris Cornell, another singer who understood the same private war from the inside. Chester became godfather to one of Cornell's children. They shared stages and quiet conversations that most people never heard, the kind of talks that only two people who have both looked into the same abyss can have. When Cornell died by suicide in May 2017, something inside Chester shifted again in a way that was visible to those who knew him best. He wrote a public letter full of gratitude and grief. He sang at the memorial with a voice that still carried power even through the pain. He hoped his friend had found some kind of peace on the other side. 2 months later, on the day that would have been Cornell's 53rd birthday, Chester was gone. On the morning of July 20th, 2017, a housekeeper found him hanging in a bedroom of the family home in Palos Verdes Estates. The official cause was suicide by hanging. Toxicology showed small amounts of alcohol and MDMA. No suicide note was left behind. Authorities recovered a handwritten personal biography of sorts among his things. His wife later confirmed a long history of depression and previous attempts that the public had never fully known. In the months before his death, he had been fighting an intense, hour-by-hour battle against the urge to drink again, even while publicly discussing mental health during the promotion of the album One More Light. The night before, those closest to him said he had seemed present and even happy in a way that made the next day feel impossible. The family had been on vacation. He returned home early for a work commitment. Then came the discovery that silenced a generation and left millions of people feeling as if they had lost someone who understood them. The world reacted with shock, grief, and endless questions that still have no clean answers. Some people searched for conspiracies because the alternative felt too painful. Others simply mourned the voice that had made them feel less alone in their own darkest hours. The people who actually knew him described something quieter and more devastating. A man who had spent decades trying to outrun a darkness that lived inside his own mind. A darkness that music could soothe for a while, sometimes for years, but never completely erase. Chester Bennington never pretended the pain was gone. He put it into songs so that others would not have to carry it in complete silence. Millions still put those songs on when the weight returns at 2 in the morning and the rest of the world is asleep. That is his lasting gift. The stages are quieter now. The band has continued in different forms, carrying pieces of what they built together. Conversations about mental health have grown louder and more open, partly because he refused to hide what he was fighting, even when it cost him. Yet the man himself is no longer here. His story does not offer easy comfort or simple answers that fit neatly into a headline. It shows that insight, love, success, and even a voice powerful enough to fill stadiums are not always enough against severe depression and the long shadow of early trauma that never fully leaves. What remains is the music, and the reminder that the feelings he described so clearly are real, common, and still worth fighting every single day. If the darkness feels familiar while you listen, know that help still exists and that reaching for it is not weakness. The voice that left in 2017 cannot answer anymore, but other voices can. Reach for them. The boy from Phoenix who turned survival into art is gone. The songs he left behind continue to do the work he started long ago, making sure that somewhere, in some quiet room at the hardest hour, no one has to feel completely alone.